The courtroom air was thick, heavy with the weight of 1,000 unspoken accusations. Marcus Tate, a 27-year-old black man with a scar above his left eyebrow, stood at the defendant's podium, his hands trembling so violently he had to grip the wood to steady them. All eyes burned into him, but none hotter than Judge Harlan Voss's, whose voice thundered. "You think you can waste this court's time with your excuses?" Marcus's breath hitched. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom, was fighting the ghost of every stereotype that had haunted him since childhood. The charge was theft, a petty crime inflated by a store clerk's claim that Marcus looked like trouble the moment he walked into the Southside Minimart. The evidence? A blurry security tape and the clerk's testimony, laced with venom. Marcus knew the truth. He'd been buying milk for his sister's kids when the real thief slipped out the back. But in this small-town courtroom, truth felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. The judge's face reddened, his jowls quivering as he leaned forward. "Speak, boy. You think silence will save you?" The word boy landed like a slap, and a gasp rippled through the room. Marcus's sister, Lena, sat in the second row, her nails digging into her palms. She wanted to scream, to tell the judge he was wrong, but fear kept her glued to her seat. The prosecutor, a slick man named Carter, smirked, adjusting his tie as if the case was already won. The room felt like a pressure cooker, ready to explode. Marcus's public defender, Emily Ruiz, a young lawyer with fire in her eyes but only 2 years of experience, whispered, "Stay calm, Marcus. Just tell your side." But calm was impossible. The judge's outburst had rattled him, and the weight of the room's stare some pitying, some hostile pressed down like a physical force. He was a black man in a town where the scales of justice tipped hard against him. He'd seen it before. His cousin, locked up for a crime he didn't commit. His neighbor, harassed until he moved away. Marcus wasn't naive. He knew how this story was supposed to end. Yet something in him refused to break. He straightened, his voice low but steady. "I didn't steal anything, Your Honor. I was just trying to feed my family." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of his Lithia life of scraping by, of being watched in stores, of being stopped by cops for looking suspicious. The judge scoffed, ready to interrupt, but Marcus pressed on, his voice rising. "You want to know why I'm nervous? Because I know what you think of me before I even open my mouth." The room froze. Even Carter's smirk faltered. Lena's eyes widened, pride and fear warring in her chest. Emily grabbed Marcus's arm, a silent warning, but he couldn't stop now. "I'm not a thief. I'm a brother, a son, a man trying to do right in a world that keeps telling me I'm wrong." His voice cracked, but his gaze locked on the judge, unyielding. "You can shout all you want, but you don't know me." Judge Voss's face was a storm cloud, his gavel hovering like a guillotine. "You dare lecture this court?" he roared, but there was a flicker in his eyes, something unsettled. The spectators shifted, whispers buzzing like static. A white woman in the back, Mrs. Clara Hensley, a retired schoolteacher who'd known Marcus since he was a boy, clutched her purse, her heart pounding. She'd seen him grow up, seen him carry groceries for his mother, seen him tutor kids at the community center. This wasn't the Marcus she knew, and yet here he was, fighting for his life over a $3 bottle of milk. The prosecutor stood, sensing blood in the water. "Your Honor," the defendant's outburst only proves his disrespect for authority. "The evidence is clear. The tape shows him at the scene, and the clerk's testimony is unimpeachable." Carter's voice was smooth, practiced, but it carried an edge of condescension that made Emily's skin crawl. She shot to her feet. "Objection. The tape is inconclusive, and the clerk's bias is evident. My client deserves a fair hearing, not a lynching." The word lynching hit like a grenade. Gasps erupted, and the judge slammed his gavel so hard the sound echoed like a gunshot. "Order. Ms. Ruiz, you will watch your language." But Emily didn't flinch. She was tired of seeing clients like Marcus railroaded, tired of a system that chewed up people who looked like her own brothers. "With respect, Your Honor," My client's race has been weaponized against him from the moment he was arrested. That's the truth we're all avoiding. The courtroom was a powder keg now, every word a spark. Marcus felt his pulse hammering in his ears. He wanted to run, to disappear, but there was nowhere to go. Lena's eyes met his, and in them, he saw their mother's strength, their father's stubborn hope. He couldn't give up. Not now. Judge Voss leaned back, his face unreadable. He was a man of the old guard, raised in a town where lines were drawn in black and white literally and figuratively. But he wasn't blind. He'd heard the whispers about the mini-mart clerk, a man known for his gut feelings about certain customers. He'd seen the tape, grainy and ambiguous. And now, staring at Marcus, he saw something else. A man who refused to be reduced to a stereotype. "Mr. Tate," Voss said, his voice quieter now. "You said I don't know you. So tell me, who are you?" The question hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Marcus swallowed, his throat dry. This was his chance, maybe his only one. He took a breath and the words poured out.
"I'm Marcus Tate.
I work double shifts at the warehouse to pay for my sister's kids' school supplies. I volunteer at the youth center because I don't want kids like me growing up thinking they're nothing. I've been stopped by cops 9 times in 3 years, and I've never had a ticket. I'm not perfect, but I'm not what you think I am." His voice shook, but it carried a raw, undeniable truth. "I'm a man, Your Honor, and I'm asking you to see me." The room was silent, the kind of silence that feels like the world holding its breath. Even Carter seemed at a loss, his notes forgotten on the table. Lena's eyes glistened, and Clara Hensley nodded slowly, as if remembering every kind word Marcus had ever spoken. Emily stood frozen, her heart racing. She'd never heard a client speak like that, with such raw honesty. It wasn't just a defense, it was a demand to be seen. Judge Voss stared at Marcus, his expression unreadable. For a moment no one moved. Then, slowly, he set down his gavel. "Mr. Tate," he said, his voice low. "That's the first honest thing I've heard all day." The courtroom exhaled, a collective release of tension. But the fight was far from over. Carter recovered, launching into a rebuttal. But his words felt hollow now, overshadowed by Marcus's truth. As the trial continued, the atmosphere shifted. Clara Hensley, unable to stay silent, approached Emily during a recess. "I know that clerk," she whispered. "He's been trouble for years. I'll testify if you need me." Her voice was firm, her eyes bright with conviction. Emily nodded, a plan forming. She'd been outmatched, underfunded, and underestimated. But she wasn't alone anymore. Marcus wasn't alone. The next witness was the clerk, Mr. Hargrove, a wiry man with a permanent scowl. His testimony was rehearsed, his words dripping with certainty. "I saw him take the money from the register," he said, pointing at Marcus. But under Emily's cross-examination, cracks appeared. "You said Mr. Tate looked suspicious the moment he entered," she pressed. "What exactly made him suspicious? His clothes, his face, his skin?" Hargrove stammered, his confidence crumbling. The jury, a mix of skeptical and sympathetic faces, leaned forward. Lena watched from the gallery, her heart pounding. She'd always told Marcus to keep his head down, to avoid trouble. But watching him now, standing tall despite the fear, she felt a surge of pride. He wasn't just fighting for himself, was fighting for every person who'd ever been judged before they could speak. As the day wore on, the trial became a battleground not just for Marcus's freedom, but for something bigger. Emily called Clara to the stand, and the older woman's testimony was a quiet bombshell. "I've known Marcus since he was 10, she said. "He's no thief, but I've seen Mr. Hargrove turn away black customers, make comments, assume the worst. He's not a witness, a problem." The jury murmured, and Carter's objections fell flat. By the time Marcus took the stand again, the room felt different. The judge's eyes weren't as cold, the jury's faces not as closed. Marcus spoke of his life, his struggles, the love he had for his family. He didn't shy away from the truth. Yes, he'd been angry sometimes, frustrated by a world that seemed stacked against him. But he'd never stolen, never given up. "I just want a chance," he said, his voice steady now. "A real chance." The courtroom was quiet as he finished, the weight of his words settling over everyone. Even Judge Voss seemed changed, his stern mask softening. The trial wasn't over, but something had shifted. Marcus had done more than defend himself, forced the room to confront its own biases, its own failures. And in that moment, he wasn't just a defendant. He was a man, fully seen, demanding justice. The trial stretched into its third day, each moment heavier than the last. Marcus Tate stood at the crossroads of hope and despair, his fate teetering on the edge of a jury's decision. The courtroom, once a sterile battleground, now pulsed with raw emotion. Every glance, every whisper carried weight. The spectators, a mix of townsfolk from diverse backgrounds, leaned forward, some clutching tissues, others scribbling notes. The air was electric, charged with the unspoken question. Would justice prevail, or would prejudice win? Emily Ruiz, Marcus's public defender, had spent the night poring over case law, her eyes bloodshot but fierce. She knew the odds were stacked against them. The prosecutor, Carter, was relentless, painting Marcus as a habitual troublemaker despite the lack of a criminal record. "This isn't about race," Carter insisted during his closing argument, his voice smooth as silk. "It's about facts. The tape shows a man at the scene. The clerk saw him. The truth doesn't bend to emotion." But his words rang hollow to those who'd heard Marcus's testimony, who'd seen the cracks in Hargrove's story. Emily stood, her notes trembling in her hands. She was young, outnumbered, but she'd found her fire. "This case isn't just about a bottle of milk or a few dollars," she began, her voice steady. "It's about a system that assumes guilt before innocence, that sees a black man and decides he's a threat. Marcus Tate is not a thief's a brother, a son, a man who deserves to be seen for who he is, not what you've been told to fear." Her words cut through the room, and Lena, Marcus's sister, nodded silently, tears streaming down her face. Judge Voss, his face still stern but less impenetrable, listened closely. He'd been a judge for 30 years, presiding over countless cases, but something about this one gnawed at him. Marcus's words from the first day, "You don't know me," echoed in his mind. Voss had grown up in a world where lines were clear, where assumptions were rarely questioned. But now, staring at Marcus, he felt the weight of those assumptions. The clerk's testimony, Clara Hensley's quiet courage, and Emily's fierce advocacy had chipped away at his certainty. The jury deliberated for hours, the tension in the courthouse growing unbearable. Marcus sat in a holding cell, staring at the cracked concrete floor. He thought of his mother, who'd worked 2 jobs to keep him fed, of his sister's kids, who called him Uncle Hero, of the countless times he'd swallowed his pride to avoid trouble. He wasn't perfect, he'd made mistakes, lost his temper, skipped a bill or two when money was tight. But a thief? No. He was a man fighting to be more than a statistic. Lena waited outside, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles paled. Clara Hensley sat beside her, offering quiet comfort. "He's a good man," Clara said softly. "I've seen it since he was a boy. This town, it's got its shadows, but there's good here too." Lena nodded, but her heart was a storm. She'd seen too many good men fall to a system that didn't care. She prayed Marcus wouldn't be next. When the jury returned, the courtroom was packed, every seat filled, every breath held. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Marcus Tate, not guilty." The words hit like a thunderclap. Lena gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Clara squeezed her arm, tears in her eyes. Marcus's knees buckled, but Emily caught him, her own face a mix of relief and triumph. The room erupted, some cheered, others muttered in disbelief. Carter's face was a mask of barely concealed frustration as he gathered his papers. Judge Voss banged his gavel, calling for order, but his eyes lingered on Marcus. "Mr. Tate," he said, his voice softer than it had been all trial, "this court owes you an apology. I spoke harshly, And I was wrong to assume. The admission was quiet, almost lost in the din, but it landed like a bombshell. A judge admitting fault? It was unheard of in this town. Marcus nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He wanted to be angry, to lash out at the system that had dragged him here, but all he felt was relief. He was free not just from the charge, but from the weight of being unseen. Emily hugged him, whispering, "You did it. You made them listen." Lena rushed forward, throwing her arms around him, sobbing into his shoulder. "I knew you'd fight," she said. "I knew." But the victory wasn't clean. As Marcus left the courthouse, he saw the faces in the crowd, some smiling, some scowling. A man in a trucker hat muttered, "He got lucky," loud enough for Marcus to hear. A young woman, barely out of high school, approached him shyly. "I'm sorry you went through this," she said. "It's not right." Marcus nodded, his heart heavy. Freedom didn't erase the scars. In the days that followed, the trial became the talk of the town. The local paper ran a front-page story, "Not guilty. A town faces its bias." Clara organized a community meeting at the youth center, where Marcus volunteered. She stood before a packed room, her voice steady. "We can't change the past, but we can change how we see each other." Marcus deserved better. "We all do." Some nodded. Others crossed their arms, unconvinced. The town was divided, but the conversation had begun. Marcus returned to work, his head held a little higher. He still felt the stares, the whispers, but they stung less now. He started speaking at the youth center, telling kids his story not to scare them, but to show them they could fight back. "You're more than what they think," he'd say, his voice firm. "Don't let anyone tell you different." The kids listened, their eyes wide, and for the first time, Marcus felt like he was building something bigger than himself. Emily, too, found her purpose. The trial had lit a fire in her. She took on more cases, fighting for clients who'd been written off by the system. She and Marcus stayed in touch, their bond forged in the crucible of the courtroom. "You changed me," she told him one day over coffee. "I was scared, but you showed me what courage looks like." Marcus smiled, shaking his head. "You fought for me when no one else would. That's courage." Judge Voss retired a month later, his final act signing an order for a review of the Minimart's practices. Rumors swirled that he'd been shaken by the trial, that Marcus's words had forced him to confront his own biases. He never spoke publicly about it, but at Clara's community meeting, he sat in the back, listening quietly. It was a small gesture, but it mattered. The town itself was slower to change. Hargrove, the clerk, left the Minimart after Clara's testimony sparked an investigation. The store's owner issued a public apology, but for many, it was too little, too late. Protests erupted outside the courthouse, some demanding reform, others defending the status quo. The divide was stark, but it forced people to talk about race, about justice, about the stories they told themselves. Marcus's life wasn't perfect after the trial. He still struggled to make ends meet, still faced suspicion in certain stores. But he had Lena, his nephews, and a community that was starting to see him. He had his voice, and he wasn't afraid to use it. One night, as he tucked his nephews into bed, the youngest asked, "Uncle Hero, are you really a hero?" Marcus laughed softly, ruffling the boy's hair. "Nah, kid. I'm just a guy who didn't give up." As the town grappled with its divisions, Marcus's story became a touchstone. It wasn't just about one man, it was about a community forced to look in the mirror. Some saw hope, others saw shame, but no one could ignore it. The trial had cracked open a wound, and healing would take time, honesty, and work. Marcus was ready for it. He'd already faced the worst and come out standing. What do you think? Where does justice begin? And how do we bridge a community's divides?